Okay, good evening. I will call the September 13th, 2023 meeting of the Manitou Springs Planning Commission to order. First item of business, I'll call the order. Commissioner Graybill. Present. Commissioner Wilson. Present. Commissioner Storm. Present. Commissioner Latimer.
Present.
Commissioner Casey.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong. Present. And I'm Commissioner Delwich. So first item would be approval of the minutes of the August 9th meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, just a quick note, on the e-bike applicant, you may or may not recall, he was asked to clean up the 5-gallon buckets, which he did, which is great. So make sure that goes into the annual report. Yes.
It's good to start with a positive note. Thank you. So if there's no discussion, all in favor? Okay. And so that motion passes. We'll move on to our business meeting and I'll start just by describing the process. Actually, I'm sorry. We do have another item. We usually start with non-agenda item discussion. So if anybody in the audience would like to have public comments on items that are not on the agenda, this is the time to do it. This is for public comments on future items. And this is limited to 3 minutes per person. When you're called upon, state your name and address, and it's not interactive. We'll just listen to any thoughts you have. And at 3-minute mark, we'll ask you to wrap up. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to make a public comment, now is the time. Okay. No, I'm sorry. I probably did. I garbled that. I was trying to read and ad lib at the same time. Basically, if it's not on the agenda, now would be the time. Okay, so we'll move on. And for the business part of the meeting, I'll call an item for consideration, and the planning staff will describe what the request was and what their findings are and recommendations if they have any. And following that, we'll allow the applicant to speak and state their case. And following that, we will allow the public comment from anybody in the audience who has questions on that. And following that, we will deliberate and just vote either to approve, deny, or possibly table something if we need to have more consideration or investigation. So with that, are there any conflicts or ex parte contacts to disclose? Okay, then we'll move right ahead. The first item of new business is variance 2302, a variance at 7 Puma Path by the owner, Jason Yesler.
Thank you. For the record, Chelsea Royston, and also for the record, Commissioner Day has joined us and is in attendance. So variance 2302 is, as you said, a request for a reduced front setback at 7 Puma Path. The property is zoned general residential. Just want to make sure that's reading correctly. Okay, the property is zoned general residential and is approximately 6,736 square feet. Accessory structures are, the request to reduce the front setback is to accommodate 2 accessory structures at the property. One is a storage shed and one is a gazebo. Accessory structures are limited by 2 areas of code. One is that the gross floor area of the cumulative total of accessory structures on a lot shall not exceed the gross floor area of the primary structure. And number two is that maximum lot coverage of 50% in the general residential zone district. This lot is unique in that it has two residential structures, and they are addressed 7 Puma Path and 3 Tulsa Road. So while the lot coverage is not an issue on this lot, the calculations for the amount of square footage allowed for accessory structures is a little murky with our code currently. It doesn't indicate whether or not you can have two primary structures. And so as these are both residences, that calculation either combines the two residences into the primary structure allowance, which would allow for a cumulative total of 1,011 square feet of accessory structures. And the other approach is to consider one of the residences as an accessory structure. So if you take 7 Puma Path, which is the larger of the two residences, and subtract 3 Tulsa Road as an accessory structure, it leaves about 43 square feet remaining for accessory structures. The applicant has stated that they already have a greenhouse on the property as well. So it's unclear to staff whether any accessory structures are allowed to be built. And so that's one of the discussion items we'd like to broach with the Planning Commission tonight. So as I said, just to make it a little clearer, 7 Puma Path is the southern residence, 3 Tulsa Road is the northern residence. The two accessory structures are going to be closer to 3 Tulsa Road. The triangular shape is the proposed shed. The applicant has since shared the information that structure is proposed to be 151 square feet and the proposed gazebo to be 143 square feet. Variance requests must meet a minimum of 4 of the following criteria. This slide is also new. We haven't had very many variances under the new code, and with the kind of wordiness of these criteria, it made for a difficult slideshow. So I would love to get your feedback on this type of slide. It's made for kind of ease of seeing which criteria this application meets based on staff's analysis. So the unnecessary hardship or unique property criteria is, in staff's opinion, is met. The site is unique in that it fronts public rights of way on the east, south, and west sides. The site is also relatively narrow and sits on a steep hillside. The buildable area of the lot is therefore significantly limited due to the grade, narrow lot, and triple frontage. The applicant has stated that there are no design alternatives. They have terraced the space using retaining walls. And so therefore the only really buildable area is where these proposed structures are placed on the site plan. For the other criteria, no supporting documentation was submitted that demonstrates that these criteria have been met. Those criteria include that the enforcement of the provisions of the LUDC deprives the applicant of rights enjoyed by a majority of other properties in the same zone district. The need for this variance is not the result of actions of previous property owners or is an otherwise self-imposed hardship. Number 5, there is a disability affecting the owners or tenants of the property of any member of the family of an owner or tenant who resides on the property, which impairs the ability of the disabled person to utilize or access the property. And number 6, the variance request is required in order to preserve a contributing structure in a historic subdistrict. This property is not in a historic subdistrict, therefore that criteria cannot be met. The other 3, as I stated, is staff's analysis that they have not been met based on the application materials submitted. There are 2 approval criteria that Planning Commission must find that these two following criteria have been met. Number one, that the variance will not result in development of areas at risk of natural hazards unless adequate mitigation is provided to the satisfaction of the planning director pursuant to the standards in chapter 18. And number two, no adverse impact will result on adjacent properties. In the staff report, I did provide a bit of analysis, again, indicating that the property owner has constructed retaining walls, which mitigate the risk of natural hazards there. The property owner also indicated that the elevation at which these structures would be built will actually fall below the grade of the adjacent road elevation. And so therefore, this will minimize the visibility of the structures from adjacent properties, and no other impacts are anticipated. No public comments were received. We did have a couple of inquiries from neighbors. However, no written responses were received by planning staff. And really based on kind of the quality of site plan that was received, there's not real clarity on exactly how far these proposed structures will be from the boundary or from each other, from other structures, nor the height or dimensions of the structures. Therefore, staff is recommending that the item be continued to the October 11th hearing. However, should the Planning Commission find it appropriate to grant the variance, staff recommends the condition that the applicant must complete a minor site plan prior to the approval of a building permit. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Questions for staff?
Yeah, you said that a second residence on a lot is considered an accessory property.
So that explanation, and I apologize for not being clear. Thank you for clarifying. Really, there are two ways to evaluate the allowable accessory structure square footage on the site. And so there are two residences on the site. Currently and traditionally, codes indicate that there is one single primary structure on a site. Being that these are almost the same in square footage, they're the same use, they were, it's unclear to staff whether or not they should be considered as each being a primary structure, or if one is the true primary structure and therefore the other is already an accessory structure, which would kind of eat into the allowance of square footage based on the calculations. So that's one item that we really weren't sure of, and we thought Planning Commission should have the opportunity to weigh in on how that is viewed in the future.
Justin?
So I have a question, and I apologize if I've asked this before. I have memory of maybe doing it. Maybe I just thought about it before, and it's not necessarily specifically applicable to this agenda item, but it did raise the question again for me looking at it. The criteria where it says no design alternatives or alternative locations, is that a subjective or objective standard? It just kind of seems that every time we see these, and the way it's phrased here, the owner stated or the applicant stated that that's the only place for it. How are we to interpret that? I mean, what if they build a smaller gazebo and reduce the amount of variance? I guess what level under the code are we supposed to get involved? Is staff supposed to get involved? I don't know.
So it looks like Austin wants to weigh in. In my experience, there's always an alternative of simply not doing it. It's not really a viable solution if they're insisting that it's a needed addition. Variances are an extreme measure to be taken by planning commissions in order to allow these unique circumstances. But I'll let Austin weigh in.
No, I think that was a good answer. We have talked about this criteria in the past because I do find it particularly problematic because it leads to denying every single variance request you get, because of course the alternative is do not submit the variance. So typically for variance criteria, you look at, do they have a hardship? And is the hardship that's unique to that property? And those are the two typical criteria that we look at for accepting or denying a variance. In this case, the new code has much more stringent criteria that, in my opinion, will lead to every single variance getting denied. And so I don't think that's the alternative, or that's the outcome that we're looking for. So I think it's up to the commission to make an interpretation of those criteria that allows for the flexibility, and maybe look to the purpose statement of the variance section in order to get there. Hope that helps some.
Thank you.
So I have a question on the two dwellings, and if one is actually an accessory dwelling to the other. And the question I have is, when were they built? So if one was primarily built, 20 years ahead of the other one, wouldn't the second one be considered the accessory dwelling at some point?
No, you'll get your chance. No.
Sorry, let me pull up the assessor site.
Any other questions? Actually, you're,
My alternate today.
we do have 7 seated, and when we get to the code update thing, you can weigh in, but on the quasi judicial, we just do the 7. So if there's no more questions, then the applicant now can come up,
Oh,
state your name.
sorry, I do have an answer on that.
Yeah.
The 7 Puma Path was built in 1972. Or perhaps this is backwards, sorry. One of the structures was built in 1916 and one of them was built in 1972.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then you can step to the. Okay, start by stating your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Jason Yester. I'm the property owner, 7 Puma Path and 3 Tulsa Road.
And you have the floor, and if you want to state your case or explain anything, you've heard our discussion and.
Well, I think some of the information on my application kind of got a little bit confused with the, I guess, departure of Kelsey Lanham. I did supply drawings, what dimensions of both the shed and also the gazebo. And just to let everybody know, I think you all remember one of the houses on the property is an Airbnb. And I think if you look at the square footage on each house, you can tell there's really no storage at all on the property, which makes it pretty difficult on me as an owner. I don't even have closet space on the property to store anything at all. And with that being said, also the same neighborhood, any house that was built before, shoot, I think I arrived in 2002 was when I bought the property. But every single property that was built and in place before I moved there has an accessory shed on it too.
Any questions for the applicant? Mike?
So Jason, the way this is leaning is, the staff is recommending a delay or whatever to next month. Do you have contractors lined up or anything? Is that going to create any kind of hardship?
Yeah, I have contractors that this has been a pretty long process. So we really hoped to get this done over the summertime. And I had to keep on pushing them back month after month after month. Some were because of difficulty of design, specifically to fit the shed on the unique property. Basically, we're to the point where we're ready to build, and we're supposed to break ground within the next 2 weeks. So if we don't, I don't know when I'll be able to schedule concrete again for the foundation pads, because it will start to get cold, and it may be next summer before I have an opportunity to build again, which is definitely a burden for me. So.
Okay, one of the issues was staff stated that they don't really know what you're planning on building. Can you just really briefly put people's mind at ease that it's not going to be a 3-story shed, for example?
Yeah, I believe so basically, to describe the property, and it sounds like some of you have kind of scouted it. When I bought it, there wasn't the middle terrace. So I spent 3 years hand digging out the center terrace, which was completely worthless at that point. And building retaining walls and making it a usable space. The hard thing for me with this property specifically is the Tulsa Road kind of runs diagonal to 3 Tulsa, the upper house on the property. And I don't know exactly what the definition of a front setback and a back setback would be. I know the distance difference is 10 feet versus 15 feet. So I'm right in the middle of there. I think there's a gray area where whether or not this is a front setback or not, which I lose 2.5, I lose a full 5 feet on, because it's not at all a frontage, it's a diagonal. And just the situation on the property makes it really, really difficult to build, something that's not close to a roadside. I can say that the way that we had to design this and have the shed engineered, because I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I had it used to be called Chrissy Fowler. I can't remember the lumber company's name now, but I had them engineer it. It's, I believe, 10 feet by 12 feet by 16.5 feet, if I remember right. And it's just a small triangle to fit the small space that is, in the corner of the terrace that I had developed. So it's tiny, just put it that way. It won't be visible unless you're living directly across the street from me. There is one house that would be able to see it. Or if you're hiking on the Inman Trail, you'd be able to see it. The gazebo is it's a kit gazebo that you can buy anywhere at Lowe's or Home Depot. So it's raw cedar, with a metal roof, and just an open area. And that spot is actually going to be developed more for the Airbnb use. I'd like to put a pull down screen there for watching movies. It's mostly all of this is just to try to support the Airbnb, which is doing really well, by the way. So metal roof also on the shed, and I do plan to stucco that small structure to the same color as the top house, which is like a salmon stucco. So.
Did you say that you submitted drawings and they were lost?
I did submit. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. There was just some confusion, with, I guess, a changeover is what it seems like.
Do you know the square footage of the storage accessory structures?
Yeah, it's 151 square feet.
Okay. Now, thinking we have this case for a temporary accessory structure, but I think is it 120? I can't, yeah. Okay.
I'd
Steve?
like to make a motion that we let him go ahead.
Oh, no, it's not
Not
at
that,
motion
okay.
time. We're still in the public hearing. We haven't heard from the public yet.
All right.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. If you don't have anything else to add, if we need to ask you more questions, we'll call you back. Okay, so now the public hearing is open to the public. If anybody in the audience would like to comment on this item, now would be the time. Okay, so I'll close the public comment portion of the hearing.
Now,
So I'm curious, is there a way, since we don't have the details about the structures, we don't want to leave it an open ticket. So how do we limit what would be built there and approve it without having the drawings? I mean, we could artificially, we could say 151 feet and assume it's an 8x8 gazebo, but don't we need some sort of parameter to approve it? You know what I mean?
I understand your thought process, but I think this whole thing is kind of trivial when it's all said and done. If the neighbors aren't involved, they're both kind of small structures. There was a site plan provided. I know it's an ILC would have been nicer or something, but there's a map. I'm looking at it in the packet. So, and it's already pre-designed, so it's not going to change. It's the other one's a store-bought package, so I think it's kind of low risk.
Other questions? Do we, we do have the 6 criteria and only 2 of them are being met. Or it seems like we're ignoring our code in this case. So that's David.
That's what gives me pause here. It's a separate question from the applicant's interest, and it seems to me that he's acted in good faith. A delay, we would need to justify that because it costs him. If he provided drawings to Manitou and we somehow mislaid them, that's not his responsibility. But what really concerns me, apart from that, that concerns me too. What really concerns me is the city attorney's comment, if I heard it correctly, was that if we follow the guidance on those 6 criteria, we won't approve anything. And that's obviously not the intent. This seems to me to be a very straightforward project. It doesn't have any adverse impact. As I said, the applicant has acted in good faith. So I can't see a fair reason to reject it. On the other hand, we don't want to violate the code we just adopted. So.
Sorry, can we make this add 2 requirements that he puts in writing that he's not disabled and that he's will enjoy the rights of the majority of the neighbors? In other words, just let him catch up with the paperwork so he can get on with this project. If he comes back in a month and says that those 2, he checks off those 2 boxes. I mean, that's. Yes.
So if I may, I think the issue here really with these criteria is that you really must, unless a very unusual circumstance exists, you must really check off the first 4. So it's unnecessary hardship, no design alternatives. That's the real problematic one in my view. Depriving rights of owners similarly situated. and not result in actions of the property owner itself. So I think we can get there on 3 pretty easily. So if I went through them, it does seem like a hardship. It seems like we're kind of on the same boat there. The design alternatives is the tough one. Perhaps the commission can get creative about the topographical issues on the site and find that there are no other reasonable design alternatives for the site that would allow an accessory structure. For the third one, rights allowed from similarly situated property owners. I gotta imagine that most property owners in the neighborhood are able to construct a gazebo. And then for the fourth one, rights similarly shared by similar property owners. Again, I think the same logic for that third one exists. So I think it's really that the commission, if they could find, on the record tonight, a finding that meets that second criteria, I think that you get there. So I don't mean to say that we need to ignore our code. We certainly don't want to. We need to be following the code. That's of course the commission's job, and my job is to hope that or advise us in that process. But I also realize that if you were to take the literal language here, no design alternatives, it would be very difficult to approve any variance. And if you look at the purpose statement of this section, I think it's to allow for these types of variances. So I don't know if I'm saying this quite as eloquently as I should, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Do we, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
do we have, I tried to walk and look at the site, but I wasn't able to see that area. Did we get photos?
I do not have any photos, and I do want to point out also that I did ask the applicant to provide a site plan when I went through the materials that were provided to me. So though we did have some staff turnover during this application, I believe the applicant was given multiple opportunities to provide a site plan that could provide this clarity. However, to answer your original question, I do not have pictures.
I can see both perspectives on this issue. I'm leaning more towards requesting leaning more towards continuation, because to me, this is an incomplete application.
Well, on that note, not to be a stickler, but if it's incomplete, I'm not sure why it even got to us. So
That would be the point, is that
right.
we typically don't look at applications that are deemed to be incomplete.
Right. Well, but here we are, and I mean, is it the applicants? I mean, we just heard that he had multiple opportunities to provide the requirement documents. It's kind of a stinger. But if he did provide documents that are missing, I think we're kind of in a pickle.
What I heard was that for example, the site plan that he didn't provide, and he was giving opportunities, but again, I think this is another example. We had an example last month, I think, where we had an incomplete application come before, and the theory was that they wanted to let the planning commission decide that it's incomplete rather than making that decision themselves.
I'm confused. I saw a site plan during the presentation.
That was a visual aid provided by staff based on an incomplete site plan. So it does not have dimensions that we would normally require of a full site plan, showing the dimensions that the proposed structures are from the property line, the dimensions of the structures, the space between the structures, items like that are missing.
Well, it seems to me for two relatively insignificant structures, specifying the square footage, what is more than adequate. I mean, we're not talking about any adverse impacts as far as I can tell.
I wanted to comment on the design, no design alternative. And I think the planner told us that this was the only place they could be located because of retaining walls. And he's building a triangular building. You know, you don't build a triangular building unless that's the only thing that you can fit in there. So I'm not sure about design alternatives. What?
I think, Steve, when you make your motion, we could say that there's no reasonable design alternatives given the specific nature of the site. And it is obviously an unusual site.
Well, the attorney likes it.
Okay, if you want to make a motion, go for it.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got the verbiage. I just make a motion to accept this variance.
Oh, yeah, we
For-
want some findings for why. You want to help, Mike? You're good at this.
Not sure what you're asking.
No, well, Steve, I guess we need some findings, for the design alternatives. Some kind of verbiage like due to the challenging nature of the topology and the shape of the lot, there are no design alternatives. Is it commission's finding?
Okay, that works for me. Can we go with that? Does that work?
Well, yeah, you
Do I have
know,
to say it?
yeah, state your
Okay.
motion that way.
Okay. I state, I make a motion that we accept this variance and based upon the design criteria, there are no alternatives because of the size, because of the oddness of the lot. And I say we give the man the variance.
Basically, the criteria 1 through 4 are met, is our findings.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, criteria 1 through 4 are being met,
And
or
yeah,
are our findings.
yes, and specifically the topology of the lot limits, makes there not be any design alternatives.
Okay. That's one of the 4, right?
Yeah, I think that one though is important to call out for
Okay,
in this case.
so we want to accept the variance and we find that there are no reasonable alternative designs. And so we accept these.
So Austin, you look,
Yeah, if I can paraphrase. And
Please.
if I state it right, then you might just say so moved after. Okay,
like
so it
this
sounds like I'm hearing from the commission that they'd like to approve the motion on the floor, finding that it meets section 180642 of the Manitou Municipal Code, specifically subsection F 1 through 4 are met, and that the topography of the site makes this site particularly difficult and doesn't allow for reasonable design alternatives and requires that the structures be placed in this position, and that so solicits this variance.
So moved.
is there a second there?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, then all those in favor, vote. Opposed? Okay, so that 6-1.
Glenn, can we make a request that for future variances that we used to get pretty good site photos of, the yard and the buildings around and views and things, and when they were presented, can we request that be added to the files when you come back for the next ones? Because it is really handy in a situation like that to have the photos and be able to pull them up and look at them.
Thank you, Commissioner Storm. We can add that to variance checklists so that we get it with each application.
Yeah, okay, so let's move on. The next item is variance 2303, 317 Pawnee Avenue by owner Karen Toe.
Thank you. Erin Ringsred, Planner 2, presenting variance 2303 at 317 Pawnee Avenue. The proposal is requesting a front yard variance of 7 inches where 20 feet are required for the construction of an approximately 180 square foot accessory structure, pergola front porch. The property is located in the low density residential zone district, and that's where the 20-foot setback is required. The primary structure is already a non-conforming structure. The primary structure setback from the front property line at its narrowest point is 8 feet 6 inches. The applicant is requesting a variance in order to construct a pergola on the front of their single-family home. Records have found that historically there was a shade element on the front of the structure, but was previously removed by a different owner as part of a flip process. And then but what remains is that there's still a concrete patio there and stone columns of what used to be. The proposed pergola would be located 7 inches from the property line at the narrowest point and approximately 7 feet from the side setback at the narrowest point. Let's see. Next slide. The pictures here are showing the existing condition where you've got those columns that I mentioned, as well as the concrete patio. The hose photo in the right side, that hose is the approximate location of the property property setback. And so you can see, sort of where it would be located. Right now, the intention and the drawings as they're showing is that the front supports of the pergola would be located where you see those columns. So they would be anchored to that, and the pergola would be within the extents of that existing patio space. Next slide. This is another diagram that shows, what those dimensions are, and you can see that it is very, tight since it's not exactly parallel to the property line. You have kind of two different setbacks there. Next slide. And then this is the example of where those foundations are in the proposed pergola roof. Next. And then these are the 6 criteria staff has determined with the applicant's statements that the first 4 have been met. There is not an alternative location for this. The intention is to restore some functionality to that front porch area, as well as provide additional shade, not just for that area, but the house, to help reduce costs of heating and cooling, and then that is something that is enjoyed by many neighbors around there, is that they do have front porches. It's not a historic district, but it's adjacent to a historic area where that was common. Next slide. So the approval criteria is that it would not result in development of areas at risk. And that information has been provided, and there'd be no adverse impacts that will result on adjacent properties. Because this is a front setback, that structure can be completely accessed from the front without encroaching into a neighbor's property in order to maintain that or, access it in the future. Next. And then we did receive 2 public comments from nearby neighbors that was included in the packet, 2 emails in support of this application, that they'd want to see this granted for their neighbor. And then next slide. Yep. And then this is our motion language. Staff has no conditions.
Okay, just a comment. I really like the presentation of showing the 6 criteria with the red and green. I think that's really a nice way to really summarize. So any questions for staff? Okay, would the applicant like to step to the table and state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is actually Kim Littleton, and I live at 3.
Oh, you need to get real close to the mic.
Okay.
You can sort of bend it, pull it towards you, or
All right.
Yeah.
I'm not used to talking into a mic. My name's Kim Littleton. I live at 317 Pawnee Avenue with my partner Karen Toe. And I've been here for 18 years. Karen's been here for 22 years. Do you want me to talk about the project or?
Yeah, anything you'd like to add, or if you're
Okay.
happy with the staff report, that's fine
I'm
too.
happy with the staff report. I guess I would like to add that, the property line is a little funky, like our yard already goes beyond the property line, the official property line. The house was built in 1924, and that side of the house faces west, and we get a lot of really intense afternoon sun. And the hope in the pergola project was to just create a little filter for the sunlight, so it doesn't get quite as hot inside the house. We don't have air conditioning. And my desire was to help protect the outside envelope of the house because it gets really beat upon. This summer, because we had so much rain, the rain was like coming in the door. So I'm hoping that helps sort of tamp that down as well. But it's primarily for the sun, and then just to add aesthetic to the house and make a nice place to sit.
Great. Any questions for the applicant?
Just a quick comment. Thank you for a great application, and the hose was a fantastic touch.
We wanted to come up with some way to have a visual of where the property line actually is. Yeah, so you bet.
I noticed that one of the photos, there was snow on the ground. Have you been planning this for some time and the application got delayed, or?
Actually, yes. So we've started this whole process at the beginning of summer, right? And we actually have a contractor. He actually ordered the wood already for us. So it was never 100% clear exactly what happened with the whole process. We had hired him. He designed a plan for us. He said he went through the regular protocol at Manitou, and then he told us that everything was approved, and then he called us, I don't know, a month or so later and said, we've been told that we have to go through planning commission to get a variance. So then there was a little bit of a delay. We sent a packet. I think it's all, I kind of let go of all that. But we sent a packet. It kind of sat for a little bit. We were hoping to get on last month's planning commission meeting, but we were delayed a month. So we had to reach out to our contractor because he had already ordered the wood, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, he's still on board. You know, he's willing to do it. He doesn't actually have the wood, but he had ordered it. So we were able to hopefully hold it. And now we're here. So I'm not exactly totally sure what happened, but something fell away.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether there was an issue on your end that you were delayed in making the application. So thank you for the details.
Yep.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. We'll call you back if we have any. Okay, public hearing is open. Public comment portion of the hearing is open now. If anybody in the audience would like to comment on this item. You need to push the green button, get real close, and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Sheila Kincaid. The address is 344 Pawnee Avenue, right across the street from Kim and Karen. And I'm here just to support them. I grew up as a next door neighbor to them at 7 Jade Avenue. I lived there when the street was a single lane dirt road. And so variances are, like, as you already saw, the lines. And I remember, as the staff report already said, though, that it is written that there was a porch there, but I was just going to say, I grew up and spent some time at the neighbors underneath that porch, but the report already stated that. So I'm just here to support them.
Okay, thank you.
Jan Johnson and 113 Becker's Lane. But I lived for 11 years at 320 Pawnee, just across the street from where they live. And of course, Sheila was a neighbor as well. And I'm just here to support them too. I think it's a great upgrade to the facility of their home. And I think it's just going to add to whatever is there. And when Ada and John lived there, when I first moved in, I might be misremembering Sheila, but I think there was some kind of porch at that point. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I'll close the public comment portion of the hearing. Okay, oh, no, you can make a motion.
Motion to approve variance 2303 for 317 Pawnee Avenue with no requirements from the planning department.
And the request meets the review criteria.
The request meets the top 4 review criteria.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? And all in favor? Okay, so that's done. Okay, so we'll move on. Item 3 is amendment to land use and development code.
Thank you, Chair Delwich and members of the City Planning Commission. I don't know if I've fully traumatized you with code updates yet, but I have another one. So I did not prepare a PowerPoint presentation because I didn't want to go through line item by line item, all the small adjustments that we were making. But I am prepared to go through some of the highlights if that was desired by the commission, or I'm happy to take any direct questions and we start the conversation there, whichever direction you would prefer.
Okay, well, it looks like Carrie has some questions, so we could start with that. And by the way, Megan, you can weigh in now since we're beyond the quasi judicial.
So I just had a question on 2 things to clarify. So number 1, page 133 on murals. When we talk about a mural being a one-of-a-kind work of art that does not appear in a public forum, including but not limited to logos, trademarks. I have a question regarding historical information. Just for the record, I'm president of the Heritage Center. And so we've been talking about using a wall to do murals that would incorporate historical photos from the history of the city. And because we're a museum, that's kind of our business. Would that not be possible given the way this is written?
That is an excellent question. And I think I would want to get some feedback from the city attorney who helped draft it.
It's kind of an unusual situation, I understand.
Right. And it is hard where art is, I mean, it's hard to define art, right? But we have to give it a shot. So this is a good way to give it a shot. My opinion is that historical references are a little bit different than putting up a modern Coca-Cola logo or something along those lines. But I definitely would want to get your opinion. What page was that? 130?
133. And so there's examples like, because the new vinyl applique murals, we could change murals like we were thinking about doing something with the mineral springs and having the 1900s, 1890 mineral springs ads, from something fun that we could do with those, or postcards that were used from our archives have all sorts of cool stuff that we could do in a vinyl mural, but because it's directly relates to quote our business, even though we're a free museum, I'd like to not have a conflict.
Sorry, it took me a second to pull it up, but
Do you mind if I weigh in a little bit too?
Yeah.
So when I've seen this before in other communities codes, it's often aimed at differentiating art versus obsolete signs. And so signs that are historical and really like what's historical is kind of subjective too. And so ending up with a Pepsi advertisement for 10 cents is historical. However, it could also be viewed as an outdated sign. And so that's often where that sort of clause comes in, but it looks like Austin may have an idea as well.
So here's the rub with mural regulation, is that you're kind of in this very precarious position between regulating what looks a whole lot like content of signs in violation of the First Amendment, as the Supreme Court laid out in the town of Gilbert, and saying that we're actually not regulating content or regulating something different, and that is the look and feel of it. And that's a pretty subjective, squishy thing. So you get pretty subjective, squishy criteria. So the way that attorneys have sort of insulated this decision from First Amendment analysis is to basically put it in the hands of folks who might have a better idea of what constitutes art and what might not. But of course, it's in the eye of the beholder. So I think this criteria will get you there for the most part, and that we have, at least by the text of it, a pretty firm argument to say we're not looking at the content. We're not saying that, you must not have Coca-Cola signs. But what we're saying is we're looking for something very unique, and that really hasn't been done before. So it's a really subjective thing. Murals are a very tricky regulation. They have not been subject of any litigation yet, so we don't know where the line is, but this is how attorneys are kind of approaching the subject now. I know that doesn't give you an answer whatsoever, but happy to discuss it more.
I'm sure we'll be able to work through it, but I just read this and thought, well, since we're a heritage center and a museum, in theory, anything historical would be business.
Right. And I think the attorney answer in me would say, well, I don't care sort of what it says or who it's coming from. I care if it is art in the beholder of the director. And she would just go through these criteria and say, yep, it looks a whole lot like art to me.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a follow-up for that one?
Go ahead and follow up because I have a related question.
Nope, that was it.
Okay.
I'm on the next one.
A related question. I didn't see anywhere in here where we address old abandoned signs that need to be taken down that have lost their functionality. Is that there? Because I'm thinking of particularly the sign at Becker's Lane and Manitou Avenue, right there in the China parking lot area. It is, I thought Tim Hawes owned it. He tells me he does not. And then there's another sign about a block down, the same condition. They used to be neon signs, I think. Excuse me? No, on Becker's Lane, right by Via Maria Terracia.
Okay.
Where the Western cabins are.
Thank you, Commissioner Latimer. So as far as I believe it's called like the U-Pass Motel sign, the one that's on Becker's and Manitou, or it's Ute something. The Historic Preservation Commission loves that sign and they want it to be preserved. But as a side note, we're working with the property owner to either fix it up or for the city to take, or the Manitou Art Center to take ownership of the sign so that it can be restored in some type of art piece fashion. So there is ongoing discussions about that particular sign. But Austin is looking something up for us, but there is a non-conforming. So in chapter 1, there's the non-conformity section, and that covers non-conforming uses, non-conforming structures, and non-conforming signs. And Austin's double checking so that we don't speak out of turn, but it does give us the authority to take down non-conforming signs. We just want to make sure that the Historic Preservation Commission has the ability to preserve what they view as important to Manitou's history. And I know they've specifically called out that particular sign. It is one of our goals as a department to take down all those other non-conforming signs, though. Thank you. Yeah.
Since we're on signs. I didn't see anything about the permanent hanging banners. And the one I think of is the Miramont Castle advertising sign that hangs over Ruxton. And are those approved for anybody can have one? Is that just an odd one-off? I just always look at that and wonder, how does that get to stay up there?
Yeah, let me look into this. That's a banner sign, right? If I remember correctly, let me look into that one specifically, because I don't know the story behind it. I know that Miramont Castle does have a non-conforming sign over one of the roads. I think it says like Miramont Castle or something like that. That's historic from like the 1910s, I want to say. But let me look into the banners and then I can get you a response.
Yeah, because I was reading this city report a couple of weeks ago and the city was maintaining their banner.
I know that there is a program for banners, like the banner over Manitou Avenue now that says "Welcome Pikes Peak Runners." Let me just see if it's part of that same program, though.
Yeah, because if they're permanent, if they're allowed, I know where I'll be putting one. Little jealous. The next question I had was on the clarification for short-term rentals.
Okay.
When I was reading through this, it made me think about, because you were clarifying whether they could have, it had to just be, they could be in a separate building on site. So it led me to ask the question, and this is probably something that we always clarify in a VRBO approval, but if it was like a triplex,
right?
Do we only approve one of the triplexes and not the entire site, correct? So they are identifying one of the triplexes. They can't just, make all three of them VRBOs because that would violate the constraints, right?
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Storm. Yes, that's correct. So a short-term rental permit would only be applicable in a multifamily unit like that to one particular unit. And so let's just say the owner wanted to move it from unit 2 to unit 3. That would be something we would need to bring forward back to the Planning Commission for a new permit. I'm not sure how the conditional uses had worked prior, because I do recall seeing some of the conditional uses are for multiple units. So I'm not sure if the approval worked exactly like that, but with the short-term rental permit, so any future ones would be to apartment 101 or whatever the numeration was.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Any other?
So I guess I have a question based off some of the things that came up tonight. Is there any merit to exploring changing or adapting the no reasonable design alternatives language?
I would take that direction from the City Planning Commission. If you guys felt that the language, now having seen a couple variances come through under the new criteria, if you felt it was too restrictive, then there is opportunity to roll those back. It's not like those are set in state law a particular way. So we do have some flexibility, if I understand correctly.
Perhaps Austin would have a suggestion.
So I feel like I remember when we had this conversation, we were doing the initial, when we adopted this code, there was some conversation here saying, we don't want to just approve every variance. We want them to be a lot tighter criteria. And, there's a spectrum there. I think before you were on one end and now you are very much on the other end. But so I want to be careful to not, put my advice out there that is not legal, essentially. I think that, from a legal perspective, this is really, really tough. As we saw tonight, it's really tough for any applicant to say, there's no possible way I could, there's no other possible design available to me. That's really tough.
If we added language that was the applicants made a reasonable effort to look at alternatives? Would something like that be squishy enough?
We could propose some options. If the planning commission is open to amending this section, I would be happy to work with Hannah and propose, just show you a couple of examples from other municipalities of what I would consider maybe something more in the middle of the two spectrums where we've landed, but I'd leave it to all of you.
I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, that sounds great. So,
Yeah, my thought was that would be a good thing to do, but I would prefer to push that to another time rather than have it be part of this submission. I think we've got enough here that we want to get through. And, I remember this discussion with the council and it took a lot of negotiating to even relax it as much as we did. So I'd want to get this through first, probably would be my thought.
And I think it's also a slippery slope to get in the design business. So, okay, enough said. Little history that if memory serves, that line has come in handy when somebody wants to put a building or something in a neighbor's view or will knock down a huge tree that we think could be saved type thing. That's in my memory, that's where that came to play.
I would just like to say that I can't imagine any language where there won't be someone to say, well, that's an arbitrary interpretation. So I think we can talk about it, but when it gets down to it, it's going to be someone's decision, which somebody can say arbitrary. And that's life in the code.
I totally agree with you. There's always going to be some squish in there, no matter how tightly you write the regulation, no matter what you're regulating. I think just the fact that it says there are no design alternatives is a pretty tough standard to meet. But again, I think if I remember correctly, that was sort of the intent.
Good, would just saying no reasonable. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, I recommend that we have the city attorney come up with some other examples and yeah.
I do have some feedback that we've gotten from the public and from builders about the new LUDC that I just wanted to fling out to the commission for consideration. I didn't take action on any of these items in this code update. So everything I'm about to talk about, I did not address with this code update just because I wanted to fling it out there and let you guys mull on it and then let me know if you want me to take action on any of these items. So for one, we've heard from a few different residents that were proposing additions onto their homes that making their home dark sky compliant is very difficult. So I guess it's hard to find fixtures at a reasonable price that are dark sky compliant. Again, I didn't adjust our requirements from what they are currently, but I just wanted you to know that we have gotten that feedback in case that causes you concern in any way. Of course, the alternative is always to not put lighting on your house. That's the ultimate dark sky compliance. So, again, in another point of feedback that we've gotten from builders specifically is confusion over the ecological characterization study. That's a study that is required with any major or minor development to some extent where that's within a certain proximity to a natural resource or has a natural resource on site. So any of the properties adjacent to Fountain Creek or have a rock formation on the property or a cliff or any number of significant features. We've specifically heard that there is only a couple of firms in the state that are qualified to do those studies. And we are currently fact checking that just to make sure that that's actually the case, or if that's a exaggeration. We have heard that that is a significant cost increase to provide that study on top of what is also often already being provided, which is a geologic hazard report, a drainage report, sometimes a traffic impact analysis, and things of that nature. Again, I didn't change anything in that section, but I just wanted you to know that we have gotten that feedback in case you wanted us to take action to roll some of those requirements back or to reassess that particular requirement for a study. I have heard that this type of thing is required with the city of Fort Collins, but I haven't found another city that requires something to our same extent. But again, there's still plenty of cities that I haven't read their zoning code, so it's possible that they're out there. We have seen a lot of interest through pre-application meetings for variances to building height and density, just so you know that those requests are coming in pretty frequently. They have not moved forward for various reasons, so you haven't seen one of those variances come before the Planning Commission, but that is often a topic that we are discussing. We also have seen a lot of interest to variances to the parking requirement for lodging downtown. Again, one has not moved forward as far as I can remember, but just know that we're also having that conversation a lot. Just as kind of a joke, no one is happy with the short-term rental regulations. Either they're too strict or they're too lenient. So we're often discussing those. But again, I think professionally, I think we've hit a happy medium with our short-term rental regulations, but just know that that conversation also happens. Right. Yes. And one of the things that the last one that I wanted to share is our thresholds for requiring a minor site plan are too low, as in we require more than we should. And a minor site plan is triggered whenever somebody is proposing construction of a new single family home, an addition of some kind, or they're altering the building, building a significant feature like an accessory structure or a large retaining wall. That just helps us document what's actually on the ground and ensures that no other future application or no other applications are necessary ahead of them actually applying for the building permit. So what was happening before all of this is they would get a whole building permit engineered, and then we would say, yeah, you're above the building height, and now you have to re-engineer it all. So the minor site plan ideally should be happening before you get to your building permit so we can catch those things. That is a huge shift for Manitou Springs, though. And I think we're hearing a little bit of pushback from that shift in the common contractors that we work with. I personally don't think that professionally don't think that the minor site plan requirement is too onerous. But again, I just wanted to communicate that to you in case you felt differently. And I'm happy to do a deep dive at a future meeting on any of these topics too.
A couple just comments, some are like grammatical and some are thoughts. On page 130 of your report, when you go list, ABC, you have 2 A's in a row, just FYI. You did a great job, I think, of not using the word it. I can't stand that word personally. It should go away permanently. The word it is awful. And I just found it once, so good work. And it's on page 102. So you take it with a grain of salt. And I was just curious on multiple households, by definition, is 3 units. Just what's the logic there versus 2?
We needed to define a difference between a duplex and a apartment building, essentially. And so duplex inherently meaning 2, we just wanted to make sure that multifamily household then meant any number higher than that.
Okay. Oh, I think there was a typo on page 107. Your first A, I think you wrote AN, it should be an A, but that's trivial. And then on 1804.24.4, I read multiple times your change and I couldn't quite understand. So you might want to just kind of look at that, just try to, it's just written where it's not really completely comprehensible, in my opinion.
Can you repeat that code section again, just so I can make sure I know which one?
I believe it's 1804.24.4. Well, let me verify that. I'll send you a note later on, email or something. One of them, I can't even file. I'm trying to give you page numbers to make it easier on you, but I'm not doing a good job. Two more things real quick. I think giving examples I think it's kind of dangerous. Like, for example, in the home occupation, that's good and that's appropriate. But somewhere I can't find it, but you used in a sentence, it stopped and said, for example, a farm stand, and then kept on going. I don't see the value of that, and I think it might bite you down the road. You know, sometimes vague is better than specific. And then finally, we talked about abandoned signs and so forth. Is there any way to stop a homeowner or commercial owner from abandoning their building? I can give you multiple examples in the town, but just buying a building and sitting on it and not encouraging highest and best use, just having an idle building for years. Can we do anything about that?
So I've heard of a couple of examples. I've worked with a couple of communities that have instituted fees. They look a whole lot like taxes for purposes of Tabor, but they're called fees. For vacant buildings, specifically vacant businesses, Blackhawk does this. If you have any vacant ground floor retail, they tax you at an additional rate. That will come with substantial legal risk, in my view. Especially if you don't do an election to do so, because it looks a whole lot like a tax to me. So there are ways to do it. I think they come in the flavor. The flavor as I've seen them are fees or taxes. In my view, they look a whole lot more like taxes than they do fees, which means they're subject to Tabor, and you should really do it by election.
But maybe just something up front that says, from now on, if you buy a building in downtown or on Manitou Avenue or any place visible, and it becomes vacant for any reason, you've got X amount of time. I mean, I know this is probably impossible, but you got X amount of time to do something about it or part ways and sell it to somebody that can't, versus what we're dealing with here in multiple places. So just food for thought. That's all.
There's communities that have gotten at it, and I'm happy to provide those examples if you like. I can't say I would necessarily recommend it from a legal point of view. I think it's pretty tough to even comport with Tabor after an election because it's not uniform.
Right.
So in a situation like that, I could see have a sweetener, like a reduced property tax or reduce something if the buildings are occupied and functioning as an opportunity. But if people don't want to do something with their building, I just can't imagine taxing them. But I could see some sort of a beneficial thing that you've got, you 100% occupancy, you're getting sales tax through, you get some sort of a discount as a different way to manage that. You know what I'm saying? Sure.
And Eagle does do that with their retail stores. They do it as a rebate on property taxes. You would have much more, you'd be in a better place legally to do a rebate because you'd get out of Tabor land. So there's options from a land use code perspective. I've done incentives for the conversion of vacant or unoccupied structures before. And so that's essentially saying, hey, we want to solicit new property owners, new developers for these unused vacant parcels right now. And so we're going to give you a list of incentives to choose from to be able to get something on the ground quicker. So I've done that before from a land use code perspective.
Well, that sounds interesting.
An example of that would be Rochester, Minnesota.
Any other thoughts or comments? I assume we'd like a motion to move this on to,
Yes, so this does need to move forward to city council to get the final adoption. So this would be a motion to approve an ordinance.
Yep, so it'll be, you're doing a text amendment to the LUDC, so we need a motion to approve an ordinance amending the LUDC as submitted by staff if there's no modifications to the red lines.
so moved?
If there's no modifications to the red lines?
Correct. If there's modifications to the red lines, then we need to condition that motion on those modifications. Which it sounds like we could incorporate those if we have a good list.
What I understand the modifications to be is to remove the example in that farm stand examples in the temporary use section. So I know which one you're talking about, so I can strike that, no problem. And and the typos, yes, I can find those and fix those.
Okay.
Okay, with that modification, I'll second that. Any discussion? And let's vote. Okay, so we push that on. So we'll move on to other business.
Me again. For the record, Hannah Van Imwegen with Manitou Springs, our city planning department. So the last item tonight is to discuss the 2024 budget and 2024 goals. So in 2023, there was the city planning commission had a $1,400 budget that covers trainings and going to conferences periodically. A couple of commissioners are always able to go. We are recommending that we carry forward that same amount. So the APA is not, or the American Planning Association, the Colorado chapter specifically is not increasing their conference registration. So I think 1,400 is still appropriate. And as far as goals go, those need to be presented to the city council. So last year, Mike Casey did that presentation. And the goal for 2023 was to implement the new LUDC and assess if we're getting the desired results. The City Planning Commission's role is a very necessary, but a very black and white role in the city. So I wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts or feelings about 2024 goals for the board, and feel free to take the month to think about it. The presentation happens in November, if I remember correctly. So there is another month to bring this forward, but I wanted to bring it to you and not just assume that you wanted to continue to review the LUDC to make sure that it is steering development in the direction that you want it to go. We haven't had any large developments come through under the LUDC yet. So a lot of what we worked really hard on, we haven't seen come forward yet. But I imagine that there will be some in the next 6 months or so. But feel free to think about what you envision for 2024. And then we can talk about it next month, or we can have a discussion now, whichever you would prefer.
Preferences? I'm comfortable thinking about it. I think we sort of touched on a few things that we could look at, like tweaking the variance requirements and so on, but I'm okay. Any other thoughts? Okay.
I would just say, since some of you have been on the planning commission a long time, if there are things that have been on your goal list, your to-do list, I'd hate to lose them. So if you Mike, whomever's been on commission for a while, has that historical perspective. Appreciate knowing.
Yeah, I think we've been moving forward in a positive way. Things are a lot better than they were 29 years ago, I can guarantee you.
You're such a slacker.
Yeah.
Can I just make one final suggestion for improvement to make your reports even better? It's sometimes when you say that the neighbors have been notified, you don't finish it by saying we didn't receive any comments. You know, so like the last write-up said, all the neighbors were notified and that was it. So my suggestion is all neighbors were notified and then what happened? There's any kind of feedback pro or con. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, well, any notice of council action and updates?
I didn't think that there was anything recently to bring to the City Planning Commission, but I just wanted to let you know that it is budget season. So the next few meetings will be, or actually, I don't recall exactly when the budget moves forward to City Council, but I know that we are working on that budget and that it will be a topic of discussion coming up.
I think there's a review of it in October.
Okay, that's what I was remembering.
Yeah, it's on
Right.
October 14th, and I think anybody can go and if you have enough brain cells to sit there for 8 hours and not be able to speak and just watch people.
I try to make it as interesting as I can, but I am one of 20 different presenters.
Okay, so with that, let's adjourn.